And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are inside the courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia, where you can see live testimony going on right now. An important witness on the stand. His name is Dean Driscoll. He's a financial expert, and he's been, as I said before, meticulously going through Tex McIver's finances. Right now, we're seeing cross-examination of this witness, the defense attorney trying to chip away at the prosecution's theory. Okay, so this financial expert, Carissa, testified that at the time of Diane's death, that Tex McIver was cash poor, and when she died, he stood to gain nearly $4 million. Wow. Is that proof? Is that the motive right there, Carissa?
I think that this is being taken out of context. We also heard testimony that they were true partners and that they actually found their match. When they got together, let's not forget, and I think this was glossed over, Tex McIver had the ranch and bought it himself in 1996. When they got married in 2005, he gave her the ranch and changed title of the property to hold it as joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which means if something happened to him, she would get the entire estate to devise to her godson Austin or whoever she wanted. The issue is with this ranch where everybody's getting lost is they were considering changing title from joint tenancy with right of survivorship to simple joint tenancy, which means no interest is inheritable by the other upon death. So she was saying, I want to give my interest to Austin, and you can have your interest with your estate.
Very interesting, Chris. It gets a little technical, but all this stuff is really important because, of course, at the end of the day, what does the state have in terms of proving that Tex McIver intentionally murdered his wife? Okay, so what I want to do right now, Carissa, is dip quickly into court, see what's going on there, especially during this cross-examination. We'll see if they get to some of these points. Let's take a listen.
Okay, when Diane dies, that source of income from Diane to Tex McIver stops, right?
I suppose.
Well, I mean, did you see any transfers from Diane McIver to Tex McIver after she dies?
No.
Okay. And you told us he needs her income to meet his actual expenses, right? Because without that, he's going to be negative.
I'm not sure I used that terminology, but it would have been negative in 2016, yes.
Okay. I thought I heard you say that you were not asked to really, well, did you look at Diane McIver's salary?
No.
Or her income?
No.
Okay, so you can't tell the jury how much money she was making in any year?
No.
Do you know is it fair to say that if she's giving Mr. McIver these various amounts that we see in these years, she was getting the cash from somewhere to transfer it to him?
I suppose she was getting it from somewhere, but I don't know the source.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so let me talk about net worth and I guess start with Diane McIver. And I'm going to give you your presentation back.
I forgot you took it.
Yes. I want to do a little bit of math. So I'm looking at page 21 of your presentation. And I'm not going to put it up on the screen because it's a little bit of a pie chart, but so I want to do.
Okay, you're listening to live testimony from Dean Driscoll, the financial expert, cross-examination going on right now. And this is kind of critical to the defense's case because the defense attorney is trying to hammer home the point that Diane was worth more alive than she was dead to Tex McIver. Is that correct, Carissa?
That's correct. She was worth more alive with her income coming in.
And that's the whole thesis of the prosecution. Motive. Okay, so that really gets it, whether that's accurate or not. As we keep a close eye on what's going on live in the courtroom, I want to play some really critical testimony from earlier. Happened a little bit earlier in the trial, but it goes into some of the accounting of Diane McIver from her personal assistant. Let's take a listen.
Some trips to New York City?
I didn't do that. As far as I know, she never went to New York while I knew her.
How about to somewhere out west with the Schwalls?
Sedona, yes.
Sedona. Okay. Can we tell from your spreadsheet that you put together how much cash she had when she died? You said the number, I think, $400,000
was
direct.
There was most of it was in her money market.
Okay.
And I don't have a spreadsheet for that.
Okay.
There was about 300, I think it was 360,000 or 260,000 in her money market. And then the rest was the balances in her checking account. The money market was either 260 or 360, I can't remember.
But other than the money market account, would the balance be reflected on your spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what the balance would have been from 206 when she died in September?
September 20. So now I can't. This ends with March or April.
It doesn't go all the way to September?
No.
Okay, well, that's okay.
But at the bottom, it says balance. I mean, it's like I said, it's just like a checkbook register. As the money was coming out, the balance was reflected on the bottom line. So the bottom line is always the balance at the time.
And let me go back. Going back to talking about vacations, was there a vacation that Diane and Tex took with Danny Joe where they went to France?
Yes.
And Diane paid for that trip?
She paid for Danny's ticket. I don't remember if she paid for her and Tex's ticket. Generally, if she was paying, she did. The house in France was a friend of Tex's, so I don't know if there was money exchanged for that.
Okay.
I know they stayed at a hotel in Paris for a couple of days. I think she paid for that.
Okay.
And then Mrs. McIver also went, Tex's mother, and she paid her own airfare. I do know that because I made everybody's reservation. I just don't remember the paying part.
Okay. Fair enough. So you said that after Diane died, you had this meeting with Tex, or maybe multiple conversations with Tex, and you said he seemed surprised at the amount of cash that was in her accounts.
Correct.
It was less than he thought it would be.
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, Tex was the executor of Diane's estate.
Correct.
And he was dealing with probating her will.
Correct.
Okay. And her will made some bequests to various people. There were dollar amounts she set out in her will and said, I want these people to get this amount of money.
Correct.
For example, or not for example, she said she wanted to leave $200,000 to James and Wanda Hugh.
Yes.
She wanted to leave $50,000 to Phyllis Gable.
Yes.
She wanted to leave $100,000 to Kathy Johansson.
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object that the document she's reading from isn't intended.
Okay, that is replay testimony, and it is critical because that is the victim's executive assistant talking about how Tex reacted when he found out that Diane didn't have as much money as he thought. We'll be right back. Stay with us after this break. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are live inside of a Georgia courtroom where testimony is underway in the Tex McIver case. Right now, if we can show the live shot there, you can see that Dean Driscoll is still on the stand. He is a financial expert. He's been testifying now all morning long, and right now is cross-examination. Now, he testified to the fact that Tex McIver was in a bit of debt when Diane died. And suddenly when she died, he all of a sudden got a $3 to $4 million surplus of cash coming into his account. I'm here alongside Carissa Kranz, a criminal defense attorney, and Charles Milstead, who's in Atlanta, a criminal defense investigator, knows these players very well. Carissa, Charles, thanks so much for joining me. Tell me, I'll go to Charles first. Charles, tell me why this testimony is important. It's a bit dry for us trial watchers here.
Good afternoon, both of you. Well, again, the state is trying to establish the fact that Tex had this financial motive. And so even though this is a very arduous kind of slug through the finances of this couple, it's something that's going to be paramount to the state proving the motive in this case. And so you're going to have, I think, ultimately a battle of the experts. I understand that the defense will ultimately call their own financial expert, assuming that they don't neutralize, kind of defang whatever this particular state's witness has to share with the jury in this case. So, you know, I think the point has been made now on numerous occasions that it's starting to appear that actually Diane was worth more to Tex alive than dead.
Well, and that's exactly the defense's point that they're trying to hammer in during cross-examination, that if she died, all of a sudden that cash flow he would get every month is dead too. Carissa?
Right. And also, if you just paid attention to cross-examination, one thing that just came out is that Diane had, at the time of her death, almost $1 million liability, and that the life insurance policy was not Tex as the beneficiary, but one of her own entities, and that the life insurance policy that paid out went to pay the liability of her entity and didn't really even go to Tex anyway, which kills the prosecution's case of motive, which is a perfect cross-examination from the defense.
Okay, so this seems like it's getting a little technical. We're talking about finances. We're talking about really, really rich people. But bottom line, like you said, Carissa and Charles, this is the state's case, isn't it?
It's the state's case to prove, and I think you're right. This is a lot of money, and the jurors may not relate to this kind of money being tossed around. So to them, $100,000 up or $100,000 down might seem like motive, but to these guys, this isn't motive. This is them trying, you know, this is how they ran their lives. They made loans, 100,000 here, 100,000 there. They're up, they're down. This isn't motive to kill. This is motive to keep her alive because she was a partner with him in all these assets and estates. Yes, they kept things separate. They separated their assets and their liabilities, but they worked together to make sure that their lives together would work.
Charles, tell me this. Okay, you've been following this case very, very closely. What is the sentiment? You're in the Atlanta area. What is the sentiment, the public? I mean, I know folks in that area are really closely following this case. Going into it, a lot of people, from my understanding, thought, okay, the prosecution, it seems kind of weird that a guy's gun would just go off and shoot his wife accidentally. Has that sentiment changed as they've seen this case unravel? You
know, I have seen somewhat of a transition in the opinions in this case. If you watch a lot of the social media and you see the initial perception was that there's no way that this could have been accidental, and a lot of that was relying on the strong financial motive that the state had been advocating from the beginning. But that seems to be crumbling somewhat. And, you know, there's this underlying thing that's going on, too. We've learned through the course of this trial a lot about Diane McIver and how really rigid and sort of militant she was with her own finances. And so there's this understanding that, you know, I think the defense almost has to argue at some point, like, what would Diane do if she had survived Tex and the shoe was on the other foot? how would she handle the finances? And I think you would find that she would have been very rigid about this division, and she would have been very diligent about ensuring that she got everything that was due to her and that her wishes were carried out.
Here's the thing, Carissa, that gets me about this case. So I get the financial motive. Okay, maybe the jurors can piece together something with the prosecution's case there. Fine. But let's talk about leading up to this alleged murder. They weren't fighting. Every single witness that has testified has said Tex and Diane had a good relationship.
Right. They referred to each other as darling. They were taking vacations. They were busy as a couple. They were traveling with other couples. Everyone said they had a great partnership. It was the first time in Diane's life that she had a partner. You know, when you first heard this case come out, it was plausible and reasonable to say, oh, come on, he shot her from the backseat of a car. He must be guilty. But as we've been spending we're into our second week of this trial, listening to the prosecution's case, it seems that they're just throwing out all the evidence possible, which is confusing the jury and to see what sticks. And the jurors might just take bits and pieces of everything and think that there's enough overwhelming circumstantial evidence to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But if you understand it, I don't think he's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. I think there's reasonable doubt all over this case.
Well, I'll tell you what, the defense team is an A-plus team. I spent a couple of years in Atlanta. I know these attorneys well. They're very, very good. I want to take us, though, live into court because this is this Dean Driscoll guy, the financial expert. He's being cross-examined, and the defense attorneys are really trying to chip away at what the prosecution is saying about the finances of Tex and Diane. Let's take a listen to see if they're doing an effective job.
In May, the documents that I received from the lawyers did not include any liabilities. I mean, that was my understanding was that was their job to put together a list of assets and liabilities for Ms. Macgyver's estate. When they didn't include any listing of liabilities there, my assumption was that all of that had been taken care of in either agreements that I had seen or agreements that may not have been produced in this matter. That's the reason I didn't include it. If there is still a $500,000 obligation from the estate, then yes, it would be fair to subtract that from the assets. I don't know that that's true or not true.
But in part of reviewing your documents, you saw documents that made reference to the $975 claim that was made against the estate.
$1,000 claim, yes.
Yes, sorry. What did I say?
$975.
Okay, thank you. And then you saw reference to the life insurance policy that you told us about. Okay. And so, just to be clear, the life insurance policy doesn't satisfy that entire $975,000.
That's what that agreement says, yes.
Okay, all right. And you said you followed the math that I'm doing. I'm going to write plus $500K for the life insurance. So now we're down to 3.2 on the low end and 4.1 on the high end?
That math works, yes.
Okay. So the total net worth for Mr. McIver that you calculated prior to Diane's death was $1.7 million.
Assuming that those other categories are correct, yes.
Okay. So if we added in the money from Arcilla, the 1.5.
And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. I'm here alongside Charles Milstead, a criminal defense investigator, and also Carissa Kranz, a criminal defense attorney. We've been listening to testimony live inside a Georgia courtroom, Atlanta, Georgia courtroom, where the murder trial of Tex McIver is underway, and we have a financial expert on the stand talking about Diane and Tex's finances, specifically how much Tex was worth when Diane died. Because, of course, all of this, there's no question that Tex shot and killed Diane McIver. The question is, was it murder or just an accidental shooting? The prosecution is trying to say, of course he had financial motive. Look how many millions of dollars that he now has now that she's dead. Carissa, do you think the defense is doing a good job at basically saying, so what?
I do. On cross-examination, they are bringing up information that the state didn't bring out in direct. information about liabilities, information about life insurance policies, information about joint assets, information about separate assets, and I think that there's reasonable doubt. There's reasonable doubt all over this case. If you want your wife dead, there's other ways to do it, and the state is trying to prove motive, but the motive is falling through. There is no real clear motive, and if he really was financially driven, he should get divorced, not kill his wife, and then he could have gotten money to maintain his lifestyle. He didn't need to kill her to get a cash infusion. He could have divorced her and gotten alimony or maintenance money.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I was a juror, I'd start losing it with all of this wills and estates. And, this is confusing. These are, really wealthy people. And so their finances are very ornate, very complicated. I think the defense really showed that during direct, the prosecution didn't bring up that whole liabilities thing. And that actually, he got $3.4 million, but a lot of that was in liabilities. What do you say, Charles?
Well, one of the important things that you just saw Amanda Clark Palmer bring out is this two things that I saw. One is she pointed out that this financial expert actually didn't credit Tex in his net worth calculation with certain assets he already had, and so he's operating on a false premise. And the other thing is there's a lot to do with the this ranch that we've seen before, and we can't get away from the fact that even though he wasn't required to, post-mortem, he independently chose to go ahead and honor her request.
Charles, we're going to have to hold that thought right now because we have to take a quick break, but we will be back live in the Tex McIver murder trial. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. As always, we are live inside a courtroom in Fulton County, Georgia. In the murder trial of Tex McIver, a man accused of murdering his wife. Prosecutors say it was for money. He says it was an accidental shooting. He admits he does it. He did it. Right now on the stand is a guy by the name of Dean Driscoll. He's a financial expert trying to prove the prosecution's case, or at least he testified for the prosecution, that Tex had a lot to gain by Diane dying. There's another really important part of this case that I don't want you to miss, and that is the police interview tape when investigators questioned Tex McIver right after the shooting about what happened. Let's take a listen to that, and I'll have our experts in to analyze.
Danny was driving, right? Okay.
I was in the back seat.
In the back seat? Okay. And what's the next thing that you can, I know you said you kind of fell asleep there. What's the next thing that you can remember from there?
Despite the fact I was tired, I don't sleep well in cars.
Right.
But we went through an area I felt it was particularly dangerous at night. That's one that has a particularly high population of homeless people.
Okay.
At least in the daytime. But at night, there's a lot of people there.
Okay.
And I quickly said, this is a big mistake, and we're in a place that we don't belong.
Right.
And I said, I'd like to, if you don't mind, please hand me my gun.
Right.
So Diane reaches in, pulls it out, hands it back to me, and by then we may have been on Piedmont. Anyway, I'm relatively satisfied that we're out of that kind of area.
Right.
And I guess I just laid back again and went to sleep.
Okay.
But she came to a stop, and I was handling the gun. I realized it was in my lap,
right,
and it went off.
Okay.
And it went off. There you have it from Tex McIver's own words describing what he calls an accident. The night when he shot and killed his wife, Diane McIver. I'm here with Carissa Kranz, who's a criminal defense attorney, and Charles Milstead, who is a criminal defense investigator. Okay, we've been talking all about finances before this, but I want to get back to this police interview tape because I think it's so important. And I think the jurors are going to be listening to this tape in deliberations, maybe once, maybe twice, maybe three times. Charles, what do you make of it?
It's completely consistent with what he has said throughout this case. And we've heard basically the same statement from multiple witnesses. I mean, that is his version. I had the occasion last week to actually retrace his steps. I did a reenactment with Vinnie Politan. We went by, we saw the exact off-ramp where they got off. There is, in fact, a substantial homeless population there. In fact, when we were there, the Atlanta Police Department was actually dealing with the homeless population because there were so many of them there under the overpass. He also says, and this is the thing that if you recall during the state's opening, they were talking about the fact that, you know, all this time goes by, and but what he says out of his own mouth is the fact that at some point his concern level dropped, and that explains why he just had the gun on his lap. Listen, I've certainly been through what I consider to be hazardous, dangerous areas before, and I carry, and it's not unusual for me to pull my weapon out of the console, lay it on the seat. In this case, since he wasn't driving, he had to ask for it, and it was handed back to him.
Okay, wait a second, Charles. I got to ask you about this, because this is the part of the story that's not adding up for me. Why was this gun in a plastic bag? Would people normally put it for safety reasons in their car? I get it being in a case, a gun case, but why would you put a gun in a plastic bag? And if we believe McIver, Tex McIver's version of events, it was cocked, left in a bag in the console?
Right. So there's a lot of explaining to do on both of those fronts. First of all, to the first question, the reason, I think the explanation you're going to hear for the bag is the fact that because it was in the console, there are a lot of car break-ins, especially in the metro Atlanta area. So if someone is broken into the car, and often thieves will break into cars looking for guns and other valuables, mostly these are substance abuse related cases where they're looking for something of value that they can fence real quickly, and a gun is certainly one of those items. So if you have it wrapped in a bag and it's laying on the bottom of a console, as they go through the vehicle very quickly, they may pass it up. They just may not notice that it's a gun. So I think that's going to be the explanation for the bag. The bag itself really doesn't have any bearing physically on the ability to pull the trigger, because it was simply a very thin Publix plastic bag. Now,
and there you see on your screen some video of that gun. Carissa, what do you make of this?
Two things. I think that the fact that it was in a plastic bag and stayed in a plastic bag, and then there was no DNA evidence on the gun, that goes to the fact that he probably did not have intent to kill his wife. Second of all, in the interrogation, there are two things.
Or he was trying to cover it up because he didn't want to get his DNA on the gun.
There are other ways to kill your wife. You don't have a witness in the car.
We know he shot her.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, there's the whole issue.
It's the gunshot residue is really the issue.
Yes, and then the other thing is two things in that interrogation. He asked for the gun, and she handed it to him, so she was in agreement with him that the area was a little bit shady. And second of all, he was talking about falling asleep, and there was testimony earlier where right before she was shot, she said to him, "Hey, don't fall asleep back there, Tex." So. And if you've been following this trial, we all know that he had a sleep disorder, which caused him to have sudden jolted movements.
All right, that sleep disorder the defense says he has was not mentioned in that police interview tape that we just watched. But I want Charles and Carissa to stand by for a minute, because we are still live in that courtroom in Fulton County, Georgia, where Dean Driscoll, a financial expert, is on the stand talking about Texas finances. It's cross-examination. Let's take a listen and get a flavor of what's going on.
And then you list his retirement plan on there of $1.2 million, right?
Yes.
And actually the retirement plan number was a little bit higher, right?
The documents are confusing. There's a letter that was produced that said that it was, like later, it was 1.3 billion, 1.3 million. But like as of the date of death, the only statement that I have for the retirement account says it's 850,000. But then there's some other smaller accounts, and money gets transferred around. It's just really confusing. I've just given him credit for the 1.2 because I think that's probably in the ballpark.
Okay. And a retirement plan is something that a person has the ability to withdraw from before they retire, correct?
Before they retire?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
It may be subject to some kind of penalties or fines or taxes, right?
Yeah, they're usually pretty substantial too.
All right. But it's an asset that somebody could use to get money from, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that is something that he owned prior to Diane's death, right?
Yes.
That's not an asset that came from Diane.
No.
$1.2 million is more than $350,000, right?
Yes.
And then he's got some stocks on here, and you told us you didn't see any underlying documents related to the stocks, but you left it in there as an asset that he owns, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then he also lists on his liabilities, he lists the $350,000 note that is due to Clay Management, right?
Yes.
He lists that as being a liability even after Diane died, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So this document has a total net worth number of $3.7 million. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. And that's the net worth, again, a snapshot in time on February 23rd, 2017, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what your presentation says is that this 3.7 number is an overstatement, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Because you said it includes assets that are attributable to Diane, right?
No, not just because of that, but that's part of it.
Okay.
There's a time, that's what I was trying to explain, there's a timing difference there too. I've changed the date, but that's not the reason that I said that it's overstated.
All right, so that's what I want to make.
How much was it for Tex McIver when Diane MacGyver died? That is what's going on right now in court in this Fulton County courtroom. We're going to take you back there live in just a few minutes after this break. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. As in our title, we are live in a courtroom in Atlanta, Georgia right now in the Tex McIver murder trial. We still have this financial expert on the stand. He's been on the stand for hours and hours talking about Tex McIver, Diane MacGyver's finances, because that's pretty important to all of this, because the state's theory, of course, is that Tex intentionally murdered his wife for financial reasons. She was worth about $12 million, the prosecution said during opening statements. So this is going through what exactly Tex had to gain when she died, and the defense is trying to prove, well, that's not exactly the case. However, there's another important part of this puzzle, and that's what I want to bring my guests in for. Charles Milstead, Carissa Kranz. Let's talk about the gun. Okay, because this is the part, especially people that maybe aren't gun experts, don't understand. Charles, you know a lot about this. How does a gun just go off, like Tex is claiming?
That's the $64 million question, yes. Right? So there's two things to know about this gun. It's, first of all, it's a Smith & Wesson 38 caliber revolver, model 638. It's both single and double action, and the other unique feature about it, it has what's called a shrouded hammer. Most people might be familiar with revolvers. The hammer is a thing that you pull back to cock the gun. Well, in this case, the hammer is actually flush with the gun, and it's a concealed carry gun that was designed in the 1950s, which means it's something you could put in your pocket or your purse, and it has less chance. If you notice right there where Clint Rucker's holding it, there's no hammer that's visible. And so the problem with that is, on the one hand, it from a concealed carry standpoint, it facilitates that. But on the other hand, if it's cocked, it's almost very difficult to distinguish that. And it's also very difficult to decock that gun. If you go online and you see all the reviews about this gun, you're going to see that that's one of the big criticisms of it, along with another thing that's probably one of the most important aspects of this gun, and that is the trigger pull in the single action mode. So there's two numbers that you'll hear floating. The only number you've heard so far was in the state's opening, and there's this 12-pound trigger figure that they're floating, and that would be a very, very difficult trigger to pull accidentally. In my opinion, you wouldn't be able to do that accidentally. And so what the defense invariably is going to have to argue is that the weapon was in the single action mode, meaning it was cocked, And in that mode, it is a sub 4-pound trigger pull. And my understanding is there's going to be evidence. I think the defense is going to put on their own expert, Chris Robinson, and that exact weapon had a trigger pull of as little as 2.5 pounds. And that is, by all accounts, considered a hair trigger. And for me, that's completely conceivable, even just by brushing the trigger accidentally, that gun goes off accidentally.
Okay, Charles, but why would Tex leave it in that mode? Was that an accident, careless accident there?
Well, therein lies the recklessness of it. That is not good gun safety. I don't know who handled that gun before it was put in the console. I don't know who put it in the console. But nonetheless, if he's responsible for that gun being in there, I think the jury's going to hold him responsible, and I think arguably he's responsible. So, the case was originally charged as a involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct case, and it was for that very reason, because it is in fact reckless. To have a cocked, loaded gun in the car. And then also there's a potential alcohol aspect of this, whether this was some sort of alcohol-induced incident as well. We see a bottle of wine that's in the back seat of the car, in that back pocket. We know from the testimony that they were drinking earlier in the afternoon at Longhorns over dinner. There's a Yeti cup in there that had some wine in it. So suffice to say, alcohol, in all likelihood, played some role in this, certainly may have contributed to him falling asleep. So when you put all that together, it is reckless, and really, to me, those are the legitimate charges.
So Carissa's our attorney, former prosecutor here. Would this be a pretty strong case to get a conviction on reckless?
If reckless is considered a lesser included offense of murder in Georgia, then it's possible that they can get a guilty on that. Right now, it's clearly overcharged. I know that it was initially charged more. It would have been easier to get a guilty verdict the way it was initially charged. Now it's so overcharged that we have to prove intent, and that's why we're getting into all these motives. But it is reckless and it is careless the way, like Charles just said, this gun safety is an issue, but it's also possible that, he was uncomfortable. He felt like he was in an unsafe area. Maybe he switched the mode and tried to doze off to sleep. And, Diane says, hey, Tex, wake up. And a hairline trigger went off. It's possible. It's possible. So then that ruins the case, the state's case of being able to meet its burden of a criminal murder charge beyond any and all reasonable doubt.
Very interesting. So as we continue to monitor the live testimony going on right now in Fulton County, Georgia, we still have this expert on the stand who's been on the stand all morning. I want us to turn to something else that happened a little bit earlier in the prosecution's case as they were presenting witnesses. A particular witness named Gail Meadows, who worked at Diane Macgyver's business, testified to the fact that Tex McIver, a few days before this murder, or alleged murder, I shouldn't say it's murder because we don't know, went into the office and his demeanor was really odd. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
And while he was in the office, did he say anything to you? No. And I'm going to show you State's Exhibit number 156. And could you show on the map where that area is? No, show on the photo which way he walked past here.
Okay, so he came this way, and I'm sitting here, and walked past here, and then on the other side of that little room that's there.
Okay, and that's where Diane's and Mr. Corey's office was.
Right.
Okay, and you could see this from where you were sitting?
Yes.
Okay, and when he came in, did you say anything to him?
No.
And what were you doing when he came into the office?
Paperwork.
Yes. And describe to the jury how he looked to you.
Angry.
Your Honor, objection. We could instruct the witness just to describe his physical characteristics and not give an opinion as to how he appeared.
So, what's your response to that objection?
I mean, I think she can observe how he appears to her. I don't think it requires any type of special knowledge to.
I'll allow it.
Could you continue, Ms. Meadows?
He was red-faced. a stern look on him, and it's like I've just not seen too many people that look like that. I'm just saying that he was red-faced.
When she objects, you got to stop.
She's thinking.
Now we have moved on from describing how he looked to characterizing it, her opinion of how he looked. She said, red-faced, stern look, something like, I haven't seen other people look like that. I asked that the witness limit it to how Mr. McIver appeared physically.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to go on to your next question. I'm going to allow that, but we're done with the description.
Okay. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit.
Red-faced and a stern look. That is how Gail Meadows, the assistant at the firm where Diane Macgyver lived, described Tex McIver in the days leading up to this incident. We're going to talk about that with our experts coming back in just a few minutes. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are live inside a courtroom in Fulton County, Georgia, in the Atlanta area, and we have Dean Driscoll, a financial expert, on the stand in the murder trial of Tex McIver. It's a trial that we are following very closely here on the Law and Crime Network. A 75-year-old man accused of murdering his wife for the money. He says it was an accident. It happened in a car ride. He says the gun just went off accidentally. Prosecutors say it was murder. All right, so before the break, we listened to an assistant from Diane Macgyver's office talk about in the days leading up to this incident, Tex McIver came into the office and he was red-faced. She said he looked upset. Carissa Kranz is here, along with Charles Milstead, a criminal defense investigator. Tell me what you make of this testimony. Does this show he was upset with Diane about something?
I'll jump in on that one. She also admitted in her testimony later on that she had only seen him maybe one other time before and had never talked to him. There were objections during that time as well from the defense that she was not allowed to discern what that face meant because she wasn't familiar with the face, and who was she to speculate that it meant he was angry or upset, so she had to describe it as red-faced. If I were on the defense, I would object like they did to preserve the objection. And frankly, a personal factors expert is who should be called to be able to explain how someone's reaction or body is in that sense. She's, they called her as a witness, but she's really nobody. She's just someone who sits at the front desk, who buzzes people in. He let himself in. He had the code. He came in. He looked red-faced.
Wait a second, Carissa. You call her a nobody, but maybe that's why she's important, because she had no skin in the game. And here she is, no reason to lie, no reason to make anything up. And she's saying that 3 days before this incident, Tex McIver looked irate, looked upset, looked mad.
We don't even have to rely on her. 3 days before, we can rely on a state's witness that testified about what took place actually hours before this incident, and that's Bill Stringer. Bill Stringer, who's a personal friend of Diane's. I mean, his allegiance is to Diane, not to Tex. He was the prosecution's witness, and he talked about the fact that there was nothing untoward with either one of them, that they were normal acting, everything was fine, they were very loving towards one another. And we're talking about he was at Longhorns with them. And so he is a far more reliable witness as to what Tex's state of mind was like just prior to the incident.
Charles, if we go,
I could kill them at any minute.
But if we follow along the prosecution's theory that he kind of formed intent wanting to kill his wife, maybe he was just looking for the most opportune moment. And okay, yeah, they seemed jovial at dinner before then, but clearly they didn't have a good relationship before that. And this was the moment he chose. I don't know if we've seen much testimony that they didn't have a good relationship, though.
That's the whole thing. Let's keep in mind, we can't forget that we're still dealing with, this is still the state's case. We haven't even heard from a defense witness yet. All of this doubt that we're all talking about is during the state's case. And these are their witnesses. These are the folks that are supposed to be delivering for them. and yet they're coming short every single time. And there is no evidence so far that there was any sort of acrimony between them, that there was some sort of, you haven't heard from a single witness that Tex confided in that he wanted to leave his wife, that he was having an affair, that he wanted to kill her. You haven't seen any evidence of browsing history where he's Googling how to make a shooting look accidental. You've seen none of that. None of the things that would make this easy for the jury. It's all very nuanced, and ultimately they never seem to really advance their case yet.
Carissa, you wanted to jump in there, I could tell.
Yes. From the testimony we just heard, she had no frame of reference to base or pass any judgment on Tex on whether or not he was red-faced or not. And we've been watching this trial now for weeks, 2 weeks now, and every time the cameras go to him, he looks a little red-faced. He
does look a little red-faced. Carissa, I think this point will really illustrate what you're trying to hammer home, and that happened during cross-examination of Gail Meadows when they got to the point that she didn't know him very well. Let's take a listen to that.
Are those other doors shown on this layout here?
I believe so.
Where are they on the layout?
Okay. So there is the warehouse. The garage here. There's a door that's outside here.
I see that.
Okay. That you can enter. And there's also a door that's here.
If somebody, let's start with,
and they're all, kept locked.
Let's start with the door to the garage. If somebody came in that door, they could get into the building without walking by your desk, correct?
Yes, I would. Well, I could see them with a screen, but
there's a camera back there.
Yes.
Okay. And the other door, is there also a camera back there as well?
Yes.
All right. And are there cameras in Diane Macgyver's office? Okay, so you don't have a way to see in her office unless you get up and walk down the hallway and look.
Yeah. My desk is here. I can see just here. I can see inside these offices.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And you told us that you don't socialize with Mr. and Mrs. Macgyver.
Right. Correct.
Sounds like maybe the total time you have ever had a chance to personally observe Mr. Macgyver on these two occasions added up to a few minutes?
Well, when he had come into the office prior to that, I've seen him. It was in the front lobby area.
How long was he in the office that previous time?
I'm not really sure. They were meeting other couples to go to dinner, and they had gathered in there.
Was he there for a brief period of time, or something more like 20 or 30 minutes?
I'm not real sure.
Just don't recall.
I don't recall how long they were there.
Okay. So you can't tell this jury that you know what Mr. Macgyver's normal demeanor is, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Because you don't know him, right?
I don't.
And you told us that he appeared red-faced, as if he was severely. That's what you compared it to.
He was like beet red.
And you compared it to being severely sunburned.
Yes, he was red-faced, just red-faced.
Okay. And you said he had a stern look on his face, right?
Sorry. He was not happy.
You have to say yes or no for the court reporter.
Yes.
Okay. You don't know where he was coming from.
No, I don't.
Was he carrying anything in his hands when he came to the office?
No.
Was he carrying anything in his hands when he left the office?
No.
All right. You don't know how he got to the office?
No.
You don't know if there was somebody with him outside the office?
No.
You don't know if there was somebody with him when he left the office, right?
No.
You don't know what other conversations he had that day, right?
No.
Don't know what else was going on in his life or his work at that moment?
No.
Okay. All you can tell the jury is what you observed in that approximately 90 seconds on Thursday, September 22nd.
Correct. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Griffin, any follow-up?
Ms. Meadows, why do you remember this particular occasion?
Well,
I want to come out of that clip because that is exactly what Carissa was telling us before we went to it, in the fact that this woman, well, she's very sweet and kind. She really didn't know Tex very well, and so didn't really have a basis for determining whether he was angry or upset about something because she didn't know his regular demeanor.
Right. Right. She has no frame of reference. She had no basis to understand where he was coming from, where he was going, how he got there, who he was with, what his face normally looks like. She's only seen him one other time, if that. He didn't even really say hello to her. He went right past her. She didn't get a chance to ask him, you know, how's his day or what's going on. All she could comment on is that his face was red, and his face seems to be naturally a little pink-red tone. And watching him sit there.
Okay, here's something I want us to analyze a little bit. We have a close-up picture of the gun used in the shooting. Charles, tell me what I'm seeing and why it matters.
As I mentioned before, if you look up at the upper left-hand corner, there almost looks like something's missing there, and the hammer is what I'm referring to. I think most people would be familiar with the hammer that you would pull back in order to cock the gun. Again, this particular weapon has what's called a shrouded hammer. It is intentionally concealed because it is a true concealed carry gun. Also, as is the case with almost all revolvers, there is no safety on a revolver, and so inherently they are more dangerous. Now, again, because it requires being cocked.
Charles, we're going to continue our discussion about the gun because it's so important. We have live testimony going on, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. We are live inside a courtroom in Fulton County, Georgia, in the murder case of Tex McIver. You see that guy, Dean Driscoll, right there? He's had a really long day. It's 1:30 now, and this financial expert has been on the stand for 5 hours talking about Tex McIver's finances, Diane McGyver's finances. Of course, the whole crux of the prosecution's case in this is that Tex McIver killed his wife because he was after her money. The defense say that's not the case, that actually he was making more money with her alive because he was getting her paycheck. This all revolves a shooting that happened one night in a car. He says it was accidental. Prosecutors say it was murder. I have two guests, two experts with me this afternoon. Wow. This guy has been on the stand, Carissa, for 5 hours. It's 1:30 in the afternoon, and the jurors haven't even had a break yet for lunch.
No, it seems really
kind of boring.
It seems draconian. Yes, it just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. And we want to find that smoking gun or that scintillant piece of evidence that's going to sway the jury one way or another. And it seems that it's just a bunch of confusing evidence that we have to parse out what's the bottom line, where to follow the money, trace the funds, trace the life insurance policy to try to see. Where's the motive?
Well, that's the problem when you have rich people like this. Their finances are complicated. You have one expert not taking into consideration all of the liabilities. But I want to talk about another important thing because we have Charles Milstead with us, and he's familiar with the type of weapon used during the shooting. We were talking a little bit about it before going to break. Let's take a look at that gun one more time. Charles, explain to us again what was going on. I cut you off earlier.
Yeah, so again, it's a shrouded hammer. It's designed to be a concealed carry, and it is a single and double action, meaning that you can, right now, as you see the gun, even though it may not be cocked, and that's the thing, is you can't really tell from this angle whether it is cocked or not. But assuming it's not cocked, in the double action mode, you could pull the trigger and the gun would fire. Now, it would require plus or minus 12 pounds to make that happen. If, in fact, it was cocked, in the single action mode, then it would require sub 4 pounds. And in this case, I understand with this particular gun, that trigger might be as light as 2.5 pounds. That is an exceedingly light, quote, hair trigger. I mean, that's the real definition of hair trigger right there. So it is entirely plausible in that single action mode that if the trigger was accidentally brushed, that it would have fired. And that's essentially the defense's contention. Now, I'm not sure whether they're going to contend whether it was already cocked in the console or whether Tex cocked it while it was on his lap when he was, when he was experiencing the height of his concern.
Okay, so let's also take a look at this picture from inside the car of where this happened. This is really interesting. You see the red circle right there. I assume that's where the bullet went through the back of the seat there. And again,
that is number 2.
Right. If you're just joining us, you don't know this case. Tex McIver, accused of murdering his wife, he admits to doing the shooting, says it was accidental, and right there we are looking at a evidence picture of where the bullet went through the seat to kill Diane Macgyver. A big question by the defense has been, well, if he really wanted to kill her, why didn't he aim for her head, Charles?
Exactly. I mean, if it's in fact an accidental shooting, then you can just as easily argue that you accidentally, shot her in the head. I mean, you could aim for something more vital. If you want to go back to that picture, I can point out a few things. One is the entry hole in the image there is really.
Let's show that picture again if we can, of the car. Go ahead, Charles.
It's consistent. If you look at the lower left-hand picture where the number 2 evidence marker is, that entry hole is completely consistent with the gun resting on his lap. Also notice in that same image there's a bottle of wine, and so alcohol likely is a factor in this and may have contributed to his sleepiness. If you look at the image above, that's on the actual passenger seat where Diane would have been seated, and you can see by evidence marker number 3 that is the hole, and she would have been struck in her lower back, the lower left-hand portion of her back. Same image, you'll see there's a Yeti cup, there will be evidence, or there has been some mention, I think, by Danny Joe Carter about the fact that there was wine, again, further supporting that. And then if you look at the far image on the right, you're going to notice all the inner workings of that seat. That's all the equipment that it takes to operate an electric seat. Now, those are all the things that projectile had to traverse to reach her. And again, if it had been Tex's intention to administer a lethal blow to her, that certainly seems like an odd way to do it.
Right. Can I just jump in on there for a second? If you bring that picture back up, the big picture on the right, all that inner workings of the seat could show that the bullet could have actually ricocheted and gone back to hurt and injure Tex or kill Tex himself. So I think it's consistent of it being an accident. It was sitting on his lap. It could have gone through the seat and as an accident, and it just as likely could have ricocheted right back to injure him instead of her.
It's very interesting talking about this, and I think that probably the prosecution is going to get into some of the ballistics involving the gun. Right now in court, the judge just allowed those jurors to finally take a lunch. This was 1:30 East Coast time. That's pretty late to be sitting there listening to that same witness recount kind of some intricate financial details. But in the meantime, I want to play us another important replay that kind of gets to the relationship between Tex and Diane. Let's take a listen to Jay Grover, who worked with the victim.
Characterized for the jurors, how would you describe your relationship with Diane Macgyver?
It was fabulous. Diane was a true friend. I mean, she was my boss. I didn't report directly to her. I've always reported directly to Mr. Corey, but I had a close personal and business relationship with Diane. Very early on, when I was married the first time, I used to attend parties at her house when she lived in Conyers and during her first marriage, and just over the years, I've attended all the Christmas functions and all for the company, and been around all my life.
Okay, and would it be fair to say that you love Diane?
Absolutely.
Now, can you tell the jurors, how would you describe Diane as a business woman?
She was very hard-nosed. She was very driven, very ambitious. She was, as a business person, Diane was tough as nails. There was if she put her mind to on a certain project or something, she went after it, and she was relentless in her pursuit of it.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors, do you have any personal experience with what we have been calling Diane's sharp tongue? If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Diane had she had a very acerbic wit about her. I mean, she was sharp tongue. I guess that's a good way to describe her as having a sharp tongue. She was to those around her that were not to just general people that she met, but to those who were around her a lot. She had a comfortable relationship with. She was tough on you. She didn't mind. She picked at you a lot. She picked at me personally. There was always about losing weight. There was one time I recall being in a restaurant. We were at lunch and.
Just objection, Your Honor, to the relevance, and I think we're about to get into hearsay. Or we're about to talk about.
Well, I'll steer away from hearsay. But
overruled on relevance. Let's stay away from hearsay.
All right, so let's talk about Tex McIver's relationship with Diane, because that's what this witness was talking a bit about. Listen, Diane was no easygoing person, and many of the witnesses have talked about this. She was a hard-nosed, sharp-tongued businesswoman. What do you make of this relationship, Carissa?
Well, she was, like you said, a businesswoman. She was running companies and enterprises and worth tons of money. So anyone on that level that has employees and has to be a boss can be sharp-tongued based on what people around them are going to say. So they're trying to paint a picture about how her and Tex may have been interacting with each other. But this witness seems to say that her sharp tongue and the way she nitpicked on people was oftentimes done in jest. It was her way of teasing you. But there was, of course, some seriousness within the joke, but she was tough, and they may have gone at it in each other's relationship, but he probably held his own too. He was a lawyer, and lawyers are known for being tough and cross-examining, and so they were probably equal partners. Most of the evidence seems to point that they had a great, loving relationship, but they are pointing out that she had the ability to be sharp-tongued and tough, which any boss should be.
Okay, you are watching Law and Crime Live. We have a lot happening here in the studio, and we're monitoring courts across the country. We'll be back with more analysis right after the break.
And from doing that, or as part of that process, did you begin the process of locating a funeral home?
Yes.
Okay, and where was that funeral home or service located?
I spoke with Mr. J. Grover and asked him if he had any suggestions of a funeral home in Conyers, because I knew that that's where Diane has spent most of her life.
Okay.
And I said, Diane wants to be cremated. And I said, do we have to go through a funeral home?
And I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You finish.
And he said he had a very good friend that ran a crematory, and that, to give her a call.
Okay. And do you remember the name of the crematory, the funeral service? It's okay if you don't.
I believe it's Phoenix.
Okay. And did you call the Phoenix Funeral Services?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And did you begin the process of getting Mrs. McIver's body down to Conyers?
Yes, I had to get release papers from the examiner's office, and then I had to get authorization from the crematory to go down and secure the body.
And how did you know that Mrs. McIver, her wish was going to be cremated?
I believe several friends have said that, and Tex verified that, and I believe her first will said that.
Okay. And when do you believe that Tex or Mr. McIver told you that? Was it that Monday you first showed up? Was it that Tuesday morning? Do you remember?
Okay, you were just listening to a friend talk about some of what happened to get the body cremated, how Tex reacted upon the death, how he interacted with friends. The ashes actually become a somewhat important part of this case. Charles Milstead, criminal defense investigator, along with Carissa Kranz, is here with me. Tex McIver took his wife's death certificate, but left her ashes at a funeral home for more than a month. Prosecution is using this to show, I guess, that he didn't care. Charles, what do you make of it?
I'm not entirely familiar with all the details, but there has been some testimony about the fact that he wanted all these smaller individual urns, and they had to be custom ordered. So I don't know if the defense's position is going to be that he didn't pick up the ashes because perhaps he was waiting on those urns to come in, and the remains were going to be distributed amongst those urns. So I don't know exactly what the position is.
And it's starting to feel like with this prosecution's case, I mean, honestly, we thought the prosecution's case was going to be over last week, and we were already going to be well into the defense's case by Wednesday. Are they Carissa just throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks here?
That's what they're doing. They're throwing everything possible out to see what the jurors are going to stick with to make their ultimate verdict decision. It's overwhelming, all the evidence. It's confusing what's coming in. I'm confused listening to it. It takes a lot of thought and rewind, so that's why it's good that we're able to rewind and replay things here, because we need to parse out and recatch what was said. And deliberations, the jurors are going to have the opportunity to replay all the evidence in that juror room, and just like it's interesting to see the jurors' questions and we get to get insight on how the jurors are thinking, it'll be interesting when they're actually deliberating how much evidence they want to bring back with them to replay and replay.
Okay, so far, we're now into week 2, I believe. I'm starting to lose track of time here. What has been, let's play prosecution, because we're all bashing the prosecution. What's been their strongest witness so far? Carissa?
Danny Jo Carter, the witness that was in the car with them when the gun went off. So that, and then the circumstantial evidence is all the state has to really rely on. But it's so easy to poke holes on all the evidence, even on their star witness, Danny Jo Carter. I mean, she should have been paying attention to the road in front of her, how to get to the hospital, what's going on, they're in a bad area, where are they going? How is she able to really, with credibility and reliability, recount all the details of what happened?
Charles, let's get to you. What's the best witness for the prosecution so far?
Well, I mean, their star witness clearly is Danny Jo Carter, but she actually wound up being a very good witness for the defense. I mean, she is taking the position that, you know, she said initially that she thought it was accidental. And so, as Carissa said, I mean, they have, you know, the irony is I know Clint Rucker well. I've been in, over the last 15 plus years, on the other side of countless cases. Usually it's a very tight case that he keeps, and then he always ends with his muddy waters closed.
All right, Charles, hold that thought. We have a lot going on. We're going to go live back in court, but let's take a few minutes of commercials and be right back. And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Live. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and we are following testimony very closely in a live trial that's going on in Fulton County, Georgia, the Tex McIver murder trial. Right now, they're in a very short break, but this judge is moving this case along very quickly. It's going to be interesting to see where the afternoon goes. I've had Charles Milstead on the line with us for a couple of hours. Charles, thanks so much for joining us. Always good to have your insight because you know the players in this case. Where do you see them going from here, Charles?
I think they're just going to continue to try to score as many points as possible on the prosecution witnesses, and that will determine to the extent to which they put on a defense case and which one of their witnesses they ultimately call.
Absolutely, Charles. Thanks so much for joining us.